A verb is a part of speech that is an action word. It depicts movement, action, or a state of being. Now, when we look at verbs, one type of verb is a common verb. Now, some examples of common verbs are talk, sing, run, think, and drive. Then you have verbs that convey a state of being, such as to have or to be. Then you have linking verbs. We call them linking verbs because what they do is they link the subject to additional info. So for example, with linking verbs, you have to be, the forms of to be, are, is, and were. Forms of to become, become, and became. For example, the horse became famous overnight. Another common linking verb, to seem, forms of to seem, seems and will seem. For example, Connie seems sad. Now there are some verbs that are both linking and common, and that's based on how they're used. For example, examples of verbs that are both action and linking are look, get, stay, smell, and feel. For example, smell being used as a common linking verb. The meat smelled funny, linking the subject meat with additional info, funny, describing the smell of the meat. Then smell as an action verb. He smelled the flowers.
Today we want to go over just a few of the rules related to apostrophes and their use for showing possession of something. So you've got a noun that possesses something else and you want to show possession. Sometimes it can be confusing to know where exactly to put that apostrophe. Before the S, after the S, to add an extra S. And so we just want to go over not all the rules related to the use of apostrophes, but just a few of the select ones. And I've got them on the board here behind me, so we're going to go over those briefly. Once again, apostrophes related to possession, not apostrophes in contractions or things like this, but to show possession. If there is a plural noun that ends in S, the apostrophe comes at the end, and there's no need to add an extra S. So when we think of the plural noun students, meaning more than one, and we want to talk about something that belongs collectively to the students, like their hats, the way you would write it is the students apostrophe hats. You would not include an extra S. It wouldn't be the students apostrophe S, students' hats. It would just be the students' hats. Next, then, you have a plural noun that does not end in S. In this case, the apostrophe comes after the word, and then you do add an S. So in this case, the plural for man is men, and you want to talk about the men's meeting. So you put the word men, apostrophe S, and meeting. So in the first one, it's a plural noun that ends in S. You just put the apostrophe and you're done. And the second one, the plural does not end in S, so you add the apostrophe, then the S, and what's possessed. And then finally, if you've got a singular noun that ends that does not, you've got a singular noun, it ends with the apostrophe S basically. So a singular noun, like our first one up here, we had a plural noun. The singular of students is student, and we want to talk about one student's hat, then we put the word student apostrophe S hat. So it mimics this rule here, number 2. So a singular noun, you end with apostrophe S, the student's hat. For names that end in S, proper names, things like that, you don't have to add another S at the end, but it is customary to do so. So when you talk about the Joneses' house or Texas's weather, the way you do it is the word Texas apostrophe S weather. Now it would be fine, it would be acceptable if you just put Texas apostrophe weather and people would know it means Texas's weather. And the same with Jones. The Joneses' house, you would put Jones apostrophe S, or you could put Jones and then apostrophe. Either would be acceptable, so it's not required to put the extra S, but it is customary. Now, you never use an apostrophe when you're just talking about like the Joneses themselves in the plural. The Joneses went to Africa. In that case, you put Jones and then ES. You don't put an apostrophe there at all. But anyway, in terms of apostrophes and possession, just to review and hopefully make it clear, if it's a plural noun that ends in S, all you do is put the apostrophe on the end. Students, hats. If it's a plural noun that does not end in S, then you put an apostrophe S. Men's meeting, mice's feet. If it's a singular noun, then you just put the noun apostrophe S to show possession. With formal things like Jones and Texas, just an apostrophe at the end is fine, but if you put an apostrophe S, that would actually be more customary. I hope this has been clear. If not, or you'd like to learn more about this, then underneath this video, if you look right beneath the video, there's a link there. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website that has related information to this, more information about things related to this. And also on that website, you'll find a link there to an ebook that's ready for immediate download.
Commas have many different functions, but their three primary functions are to separate clauses, join independent clauses, and they're used to avoid confusion. So since we talked about separating and joining clauses, let's first talk about what a clause is. A clause is a piece of a sentence. If you have a dependent clause, it is dependent on the rest of the sentence. It cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. It would be a fragment. If you have an independent clause, it would be able to stand alone as a sentence. It would be independently a sentence on its own. So dependent clause can't be a sentence by itself, depends on the rest of the sentence. Independent clause stands alone, can be a sentence all by itself. So let's look at how we can separate clauses with commas. You will use a comma to separate a dependent introductory clause from an independent clause. So one way that dependent clauses are used is as an introduction to a sentence. For instance, before the game, Jimmy ate a healthy breakfast. We use this comma to separate the dependent clause. So before the game is dependent. You cannot say before the game all by itself and have it be a complete sentence. It's only a prepositional phrase. So it is a dependent clause. But then you have Jimmy ate a healthy breakfast. This would be independent. It could stand all by itself. So we are separating the dependent introductory clause from the independent clause. Before the game, Jimmy ate a healthy breakfast. And you notice how you pause where that comma is. And a lot of times, that's why a comma is there, to get you to pause so that your sentence makes sense as you're reading it, either to yourself in a book or aloud to someone else. So, dependent clause as an introduction needs a comma. Now, let's look at if we kind of switch the order of the sentence up. Jimmy ate a healthy breakfast before the game. When we put before the game at the end of the sentence, we don't need to have that comma anymore. We only needed the comma whenever we wanted to pause to let people know that before the game was separate and to realize the action was happening after that. So Jimmy ate a healthy breakfast before the game. Here, we didn't actually have to put a comma because the independent clause came first. So we had our dependent clause at the end, no comma needed. Now this is in this situation. That doesn't mean there will never be a situation where you will have a dependent clause at the end that needs a comma. If you have several items in a series, you may still need a comma toward the end of the sentence. But if you're using an introductory phrase, if it comes at the beginning of the sentence, you need the comma. If it comes at the end of a sentence, generally you won't. Let's look at another way that we use commas to separate clauses. You will use a comma to separate two independent clauses joined by any of the following conjunctions. And a conjunction is basically a connector word. And, but, or, for, nor, so, and yet are common conjunctions. If you have two independent clauses, that means two phrases in a sentence that could stand as a sentence on their own, and they're connected by one of these conjunctions, then you will need a comma to separate those two. We are going to the movies, or we are going to a nice restaurant. So here's our conjunction, or. We are going to the movies is an independent clause. We are going to a nice restaurant is an independent clause. So the comma is needed to separate two independent clauses. Now, let's look at if we combine this sentence a different way. We are going to the movies or to a nice restaurant. Here, we have that or, which would be a conjunction, but let's look. We are going to the movies is an independent clause. To a nice restaurant is dependent. To a nice restaurant cannot stand by itself. We don't have a subject in that clause. In this version of the sentence, we had we are going still included. So we still had a subject and a verb, so this was a complete thought all by itself. So it was an independent clause. It could stand as a sentence. To a nice restaurant is missing that. It's missing both your subject and your verb. It's not been made a complete sentence, so it's dependent on the rest of the sentence to make sense. So in this instance, we did not have two independent clauses. So no comma was needed. Okay, now let's look at the second primary function of a comma. To join independent clauses, to avoid short, choppy sentences. So generally, whenever we are going to join independent clauses, we're doing it so that we don't have a series of short, choppy sentences. Now you're going to see that this might look a little similar to where we separated independent clauses. Sarah plays softball and Sarah enjoys swimming. Okay, and this one we had an independent clause, or a conjunction, and an independent clause. Let's look at the next version of this set of clauses. Sarah plays softball, runs track, and enjoys swimming. So Sarah plays softball. This is independent. Runs track is dependent. We have our conjunction, and enjoys swimming is dependent. Yet we still had those commas. And then let's look at the last version. Sarah plays softball, Sarah runs track, Sarah enjoys swimming. So all three of these are going to be independent clauses because they are complete sentences. But they're short, choppy sentences. Sarah plays softball, Sarah runs track, Sarah enjoys swimming. We keep hearing Sarah over and over, and these sentences are short. We can combine them to make it a smoother flowing sentence. So you could have two independent clauses joined by a conjunction like we did up here, and then you would use that comma to separate them. But you are still joining multiple sentences when you do that. So you're using those commas to separate the clauses, but you were using them to also join two sentences into one. So, Sarah plays softball and Sarah enjoys swimming. So here, we used our comma to join these two independent thoughts. Sarah plays softball, runs track, and enjoys swimming. Well, we had dependent clauses here, but we still had a conjunction. The reason we're going to put commas here is because you've got 3 or more items in a series. If you list 3 or more items or clauses, activities in a series, you're going to separate them with commas. So the reason we're using it here is to separate 3 or more items in a series. Here we were using it to separate 2 independent clauses. And then at the end we had no commas. We just had 3 complete sentences, which basically equaled 3 independent clauses. So we had to find ways to combine them. So we could combine all 3 into one sentence, and we could use our rule of using 3 or more commas in a series to join these different independent clauses, or we could use our rule of separating 2 independent clauses with a comma and a conjunction and keep 2 independent clauses instead of separating it up and making it dependent clauses but 3 different activities in a series. We could say Sarah collects bananas, apples, and tomatoes. We would have to put commas in that series too. Sarah collects bananas, comma, tomatoes, comma, and apples. So, when you have 3 or more items in a series, you have to put your commas to separate them. This is going to be helpful when you're combining different ideas to be able to join independent clauses and in other instances. If you have just 2 sentences that you would like to combine, you can do so using a conjunction and a comma. As long as it's still an independent clause on each side, you will need that comma. Let's look at the third primary function of a comma. They are used to avoid confusion. I want to eat chicken, broccoli, and corn for dinner. Without a comma in this sentence, it sounds like you're saying you want to eat chicken broccoli. Well, you probably don't know what chicken broccoli is, and that's because it's not a real food. What would make more sense is if we said I want to eat chicken, comma, broccoli, comma, and corn for dinner. Then you would be telling someone you would like to eat chicken, broccoli, and corn. 3 items, not chicken broccoli, which makes chicken look like an adjective to broccoli. Now, this comma here in a series, if you have 3 or more items, the comma immediately before and is optional. Some people like the way it looks, some don't. I like the way the comma looks. It helps me feel more organized when I'm writing, so I always put it in. But you definitely need this comma because otherwise the meaning of your sentence is unclear and you would not be avoiding that confusion that commas are supposed to help you avoid. Let's look at the next example. Before we eat, our dog has to eat. This doesn't make sense. Before we eat our dog, you're not going to eat your dog. But if you're reading this sentence quickly, without a comma there to slow you down and make you pause, you don't read it correctly. You would have to read it a second or third time to get what the author's meaning actually was. So you would say, before we eat, our dog has to eat. And maybe this is so that your dog isn't going to bother you while you eat. If your dog's already eaten, then you can eat happily. So before we eat, our dog has to eat. And this is one of those dependent introductory clauses like we talked about up here. We use it to separate, we use a comma to separate clauses, and that can also avoid confusion. So you see how some of these rules tie in together. Commas in a series, commas in a series. Introductory clause being separated from the independent clause that is the rest of the sentence. Dependent clause separated from independent clause. So a lot of the rules of commas may overlap a little bit, But these are three of the primary functions you're going to see commas used for. That doesn't mean you won't see them used any other way. They're also used geographically if you're talking about a city inside of a country or inside of a state. If you're talking about dates or times, then you may also use commas. Commas are used in people's names sometimes if you're putting a junior or a senior. So these aren't the only times you're going to see commas, but in writing, these are the primary functions in which you are going to see commas used.
There are two primary uses for the semicolon in the English language. The first is to separate two closely related independent clauses within a sentence. If you use a semicolon, there's no need to include a coordinating conjunction such as and. The second use for a semicolon is to separate items in a list when the items are long and complicated or contain internal punctuation such as a comma. Ordinarily, you would use a comma to separate items in a list, but if the items contain commas within them, it may be confusing to separate the items with a comma. So that's where the semicolon comes in. Here we have one example sentence for each usage. In this first one, we have two independent clauses separated by a semicolon. So each of these clauses could stand on its own as a sentence, but we've chosen to combine them into a single sentence, and we do so with a semicolon. It's proper to use a semicolon in this sentence because the two phrases, I went to the doctor and he told me I had the flu, are very closely related to one another. Hearing that you have the flu is a direct result of going to the doctor. You would not, for instance, be able to use a semicolon in a situation where your two clauses were, I went to the doctor, I scored a 99 on my exam, because they're not related in the same way that these are. So in order to use a semicolon to separate two independent clauses, the two clauses must be very closely related to one another. The second example was items in a list. So as you can see here, we've got three items, and they are city-state combinations. So you'll recall the proper way to list out cities and states is city, comma, state. So each item has an internal comma. So it could be confusing to try to separate them with commas, so the proper usage in this instance is to use a semicolon to separate each of them. So these are the two primary uses for semicolons in English.
Adjective clauses and phrases are groups of words that collectively play the role of an adjective. So I want to take a look at examples of a clause and a phrase. So let's take a look at this first sentence. It says, the car that is parked in the yard is mine. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you that this first example is an adjective clause. And adjective clauses contain both a subject and a verb. So the adjective clause in this sentence contains both a subject and a verb. So we're looking for this clause in this sentence. So like I said, adjective clauses collectively play the role of an adjective. So we're looking for a group of words that describe another word in the sentence. So if you look right here at that is parked in the yard, it's marked off by commas. And that is parked in the yard plays the role, or could play the role, of an adjective because it's describing the word car. So if we look at this clause right here, we notice that it contains both a subject, that, and is, which is a verb. And parked is also a verb. So that is parked in the yard. And so what is parked in the yard? The car is parked in the yard. So that is parked in the yard is further describing the word car. So this right here is an adjective clause. And adjectives can often be removed from a sentence, and the sentence will still make sense. And if you notice right here that this phrase or this clause right here is marked off by two commas. And any time a group of words is marked off by two commas, it can be removed from the sentence, and the sentence will still make sense. So take a look at this. Just X this out. We don't even read that, and we just read the sentence as that, or the car is mine. The sentence still makes sense without this adjective clause. And so that's another way to be able to tell that this is an adjective clause because it can be removed from the sentence. Now, we've talked about adjective clauses, so as you can guess, this next example is going to be an adjective phrase. The sentence is very similar to the first, except it's missing two words. So those two words are that and is. Instead of saying that is parked in the yard, the sentence just picks up with parked. It says parked in the yard. So let's read the sentence as a whole. The car parked in the yard is mine. So this right here is going to be the adjective phrase. Why? Because it doesn't contain both a subject and a verb. It's missing the subject, which is that, and the verb, which is parked. Well, parked is still in this phrase, which is a verb, but it's missing part of its verb, which is, and it's missing a noun, or it's missing its subject, that. So this phrase doesn't have a subject and a verb, so that's why we call it an adjective phrase, because phrases don't have both a subject and a verb. So parked in the yard is the adjective phrase, because there's no one word in here that's describing car, but collectively these words make an adjective phrase which further describe the word car. The car parked in the yard. So parked in the yard is telling you where the car is parked. So there you've seen a quick preview to give you a better understanding of what adjective clauses and adjective phrases are and how they can be used. Adverb clauses and adverbial phrases are groups of words that play the role of an adverb. So let's take a look at this example sentence on the board. When I complete this task, we can go. Now the meat of this sentence, the subject and verb of this sentence, comes in the later part of the sentence. We can go. We right here is the subject, and can go is the verb phrase. So when I complete this task could actually be removed from the sentence, and the sentence would still make sense. We can go makes perfect sense by itself. So when I complete this task then is an adverb, because adverbs aren't necessarily important to a sentence. You can remove an adverb and the sentence will still make sense without it, because adverbs just merely modify or further describe another word in the sentence. So since we can remove when I complete this task from the rest of the sentence, then it is probably our adverb clause, and it is. Now there's not one word in this adverb clause right here that actually would be an adverb by itself. It's the group of words right here together that modify the verb can go, or the verb phrase can go, because can and go together make up the verb phrase. So when I complete this task is our adverb clause, and it modifies can go. It's answering the question when. When can we go? When I complete this task. Because adverbs often answer a question. So the question here is when, and it's saying when I complete this task. Now notice that it's called a clause. It's called an adverb clause, and that's because clauses contain both a subject and a verb. And that is the case with this group of words right here. You see a subject and a verb. I is the subject, and complete is the verb. All right, so let's look at this next sentence. In a moment, the pizza will be ready. Here, the meat of our sentence is, again, in the later part of the sentence. Pizza is the subject, and will be is the verb phrase. So here again, in a moment, could be removed from the sentence. In a moment, the pizza will be ready. Now let's try reading the sentence without this. The pizza will be ready. The sentence still makes sense, so this is probably our adverbial phrase. Now notice this time, it's called an adverbial phrase instead of an adverb clause. Well, what's the reasoning behind that? The reasoning is a clause contains both a subject and a verb. A phrase does not contain a subject and a verb. And here, there's no subject and there's no verb. So that's why it's called an adverbial phrase. This group of words right here, in a moment, describes or modifies will be. Again, it's answering the question when. When will the pizza be ready? It'll be ready in a moment. So the important thing to remember is the main distinction between adverb clauses and adverbial phrases. Adverb clauses are a group of words that modify another word. But the adverbial clause, or the adverb clause, contains both a subject and a verb. In the case of an adverbial phrase, it again is a group of words that modifies another word. But in this case, the adverbial phrase does not contain a subject and a verb. Adverbs can modify adjectives. So let's take a look at an example of that up here on the board. I work in an extremely tall building. So I'm going to draw a circle around the adjective here, and I'm going to draw a box around the adverb here, and I'm going to draw a line under the word that the adjective is modifying. So I work in an extremely tall building. So you could remove the adverb and adjective here, and you could just read the sentence as I work in an building, or I work in a building. So extremely and tall are the modifiers here, because a lot of times, or generally, modifiers can be removed from a sentence and the sentence will still make perfect sense. So extremely and tall are just further describing the building. So tall is an adjective which further describes building. Now extremely is an adverb. The temptation here is to think that extremely is modifying building. Now let's try to remove tall from this sentence and leave extremely in building and see if the sentence makes sense. I work in an extremely building. That doesn't make any sense. That's because extremely is not modifying building. Extremely is modifying tall. I work in an extremely tall building. How tall? Extremely tall. Because adverbs answer a question. In this case, the question is how. How tall is the building? So the adverb answers that question saying that the building is extremely tall. Let's look at another example. He wrote a very concise summary. So again, I'm going to draw a box around the adverb, a circle around the adjective, and I'm going to put a line under the word that the adjective modifies. So we could remove very and concise from this sentence because they're modifiers, and we could read the sentence as he wrote a summary. Now, let's put the adjective and adverb back in the sentence. He wrote a very concise summary. Concise is describing summary. It's modifying it. It's further describing summary. Now here again, you could think that very is an adverb that's modifying summary. But if you take concise out of the sentence and read the sentence without concise in it, it doesn't make sense. See what I mean? He wrote a very summary. That doesn't make any sense. That's because very is not modifying summary. Adverbs cannot modify nouns. They modify adjectives, adverbs, or verbs. So in this case, very is modifying an adjective, which is concise. It's answering the question, how? How concise is the summary? And the adverb is answering that question by saying the summary is very concise. Choosing the correct adjective can sometimes be difficult, especially in certain confusing cases. One of those cases is whether or not to use less or fewer. That is the question. And a lot of people get this confused, so I don't want this to hold you up. Less is used when you're talking about things that aren't countable. Like you would say, there is less sand on this beach than the beach we were at last weekend, because sand's not something that's countable. You use fewer when you're referring to something that is countable. Like, there are fewer doors on this house than the last house we lived in, because doors is something that's very countable. Let's take a look at some examples. There are fewer people over here. People is something that's countable, so we use fewer. This sentence says there is less water in this river. Now, you could argue that water is something countable, because you could think, oh, you can count water in gallons of water. But we're not talking about gallons of water. We're just talking about water in general, and water is not something that's countable. So we use the adjective less. There is less water in this river. Now this next sentence combines cases in which we can use less and fewer. It says, use less sugar when making fewer cookies. Sugar is not something that's countable. I mean, of course you could count each individual grain of sugar, but overall, sugar is not countable. So we use the adjective less. And then we continue on to the sentence. It says, use less sugar when making fewer cookies. Cookies is something that's very countable. So we use the adjective fewer. Now finally, there is a case which makes this whole case kind of more confusing. When you're talking about something that contains a number, when you're talking about numerical things, you use the adjective less. So this sentence says the shirt will cost less than $20. Now you may think that dollars is something that's very countable. It is, but to be grammatically correct, you use the adjective less. This shirt will cost less than $20. Or this purchase will consume less than 45% of my budget. If you're using a percentage or any kind of statistical or numerical thing in a sentence, you use the adjective less. So that's just a side note you need to remember. But overall, you use less when you're talking about something that's not countable. And you use fewer when you're talking about something that is countable. Many times readers come across words that they are unfamiliar with. So it's important that readers understand how to determine the definition of a word based on its context. This means looking at the words around it and how the word is used in the sentence. Let's look at a couple of examples. This first example says, the elderly scholar spent his evenings hunched over arcane text that few other people even knew existed. So the unfamiliar word here is arcane, but you will see that you can pretty much determine the definition of that word based on the words around it. Here we see the word elderly coming before scholar. So if only an elderly scholar would be studying these texts, then it means that it must be some kind of complex subject that only someone who has acquired much knowledge and wisdom would understand. And then we also see that it says that few other people even knew existed. So that means it's something rare or something that only a few people would know about. So here we have easily and quickly determined the definition of arcane. This next sentence says, Ron's fealty to his parents was not shared by Karen, who disobeyed their every command. Now you'll notice here that there's not very many words that tell us the definition of fealty. Instead, we see words that tell us what fealty is not. Because here it says, Karen, who disobeyed their every command. Here, Ron is being contrasted with Karen. So if fealty is not disobeying their every command, then fealty must mean obeying or being faithful to. Because notice here we're seeing that Karen disobeys their every command, but Ron does not. So Ron must mean not disobeying. In other words, it means obeying. So you see here how by looking at context clues, a reader can quickly determine the definition of a word. And although it may not be the exact definition, it generally will be the definition for that word in that particular sentence. And so this can be very helpful because it helps a reader be more efficient, because determining the definition of a word based on context is much quicker than consulting a dictionary or a thesaurus. It is very important to avoid the use of double negatives in writing and in speech. Take a look at this sentence. The man did not say nothing. Now this is what is called a double negative, because there are two negatives in this sentence. Some negatives would be no, not, and nothing. Or nobody would also be a negative. Notice here what these all have in common. The letters N-O, no, 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 no. Now there are some negatives that don't include no, but many do. So you cannot have two negatives coexisting in a sentence because they cancel each other out. See, this sentence says the man did not say nothing. So basically, this is saying, if you take out the word not, it's saying the man did say nothing. So the man did not say anything. But if you put the word not in there, you're saying the man did not say anything. So you're saying that the person actually did say something. If you didn't track with me there, that's okay, because that's the problem with double negatives. They're confusing. So the correct way to write this sentence would be, the man did not say anything. Notice how I corrected this sentence. I was able to leave the sentence pretty much intact. I just changed the NO here to anything, right here to any, from nothing to any, and that makes the sentence make more sense. Another way to do this would be to say the man said nothing. Here you have the subject of the sentence and then the verb, and you're saying that the person said nothing. So there's only one negative in that sentence. So those are two possible remedies to the problematic double negative sentence right there. The exclamation point is used to show strong emotion. It's important that writers only use the exclamation point sparingly, because if it's used too much, it loses its effect. So make sure it is only used when it is actually needed. So take a look at this sentence. Look at that sunrise. So basically here it depends on how the writer wants to convey this sentence. Or say this is a quotation, it depends on how the speaker said it. So if the speaker said, look at that sunrise, we would just put a period at the end. But if the speaker said, look at that sunrise, then we would put an exclamation point or an exclamation mark, as it is often called. Exclamation points can often be used after one word, like wow, look at that sunrise. So here the exclamation point is used twice because the speaker said it with lots of emotion. Now, if it's not a quotation, then it just depends on how you as the writer wants to convey a message. So if you want it to be very subtle, you just add a period to the end of the sentence. But if it's a strong point that you want to show the reader, then use an exclamation point to help that sentence stand out. But remember that many times an exclamation point is seen as being used to show that the speaker or the writer is yelling. So if you use lots of exclamation points, then the reader feels like the writer is always yelling at them. An exclamation point can often be used in place of a question mark. So, like, take a look at this sentence. What is going on? So here, generally, you would put a question mark because it's a question. But if the speaker said it like, what is going on, or the writer wants to convey that strong emotion, then you'd put an exclamation point in place of the question mark. So again, make sure that the exclamation point is used appropriately and not too often so that it does not lose its effect.
Fragments and run-on sentences. A fragment is an incomplete sentence or thought that cannot stand on its own. And it can't stand on its own and is incomplete because it's missing either a noun or a verb. So let's look at some examples of fragments. The beautiful blooming daisies in my yard. Now this is a lot of information. The beautiful blooming daisies in my yard. But you have your noun, some adjectives to describe it, an article adjective, and then you've got a prepositional phrase that tells you where they are. But you're missing something. You're missing the verb. So this one is a fragment. So you can have a longer sentence or a longer fragment that looks like a sentence and still have it be a fragment because it's missing either the noun or the verb. So we had our noun, but we were missing our verb. So even though it looks long and looks like it could be a sentence, don't be fooled by the length of a fragment because just because a phrase is long doesn't mean it's a complete sentence. Let's look at another example. Waited all day at my house for you. In this sentence, we have an action, waiting, so we've got our verb. all day at my house for you. Well, you see some pronouns in there, but there's no noun. There's no subject of this sentence. So you're missing a subject noun in this one. So it's still a fragment. You've got the verb part, you've got the predicate part of your sentence, but you don't have the subject part. So this is a fragment. It is not a complete sentence. So when you're looking for fragments, look for either a missing verb or missing noun, because if you're missing one of those, then your fragment cannot stand on its own and will not be a complete sentence. In your writing, you'll need to revise these, and often you can just add a little bit to a fragment to make it a complete sentence. The beautiful blooming daisies in my yard look so nice this time of year. Smell wonderful. Are going to win the contest. You can finish the sentence in any way. Waited all day at my house for you. You could say, we waited all day at my house for you. I waited. My mom and I waited. It's a little bit more limited what you could put at the beginning of this sentence because we've got my and you for pronouns down here, but you still have options and you could easily turn this fragment into a complete sentence. Now let's look at run-on sentences. A run-on sentence is a sentence that should be written as two sentences. It's too long. It contains too much information and is confusing to the reader. And if it's running on and on and on, then it's likely there's not correct punctuation and there's too many nouns and too many verbs crammed into one sentence. So you need to break it up so that you've got separate complete thoughts and it's easier for the reader to understand. Let's look at these examples of run-on sentences and then correct them. I couldn't believe it when I heard that there were going to be thunderstorms tomorrow. I was planning on having a barbecue outside to celebrate summer. This is a lot of information, so we need to see where one thought ends and another one starts so that we can split it up. I couldn't believe it. Well, we want to know what she couldn't believe. I couldn't believe it when I heard that there were going to be thunderstorms tomorrow. So all that is one thought. So we're going to separate this and put a period, and we would need to capitalize the next letter, but since it was I, it was automatically capitalized. I was planning on having a barbecue outside to celebrate summer. Now we have two complete sentences. They're separate, it's not too much information in each sentence, and it's not going to be confusing to the reader. I couldn't believe it when I heard that there were going to be thunderstorms tomorrow. I was planning on having a barbecue outside to celebrate summer. So now, it's not so confusing. It doesn't just run on and on and on. We didn't have so many subjects and so many verbs in one sentence. Now we've separated it out and made it easier for the reader to understand right away. Let's look at our next example. John and Mary had so much fun they went to the fair and rode rides and ate cotton candy. Now this one, we need to find where we need to split it up. We have another run-on sentence. We've got a lot of actions, but we need to see where we could split it up to keep the subject and verb of one sentence and the subject and verb of a second sentence and make it two complete sentences. We don't want to split it up incorrectly and leave a fragment somewhere. John and Mary. Let's look at what they did. John and Mary had so much fun, they. When we get to they, that's a new pronoun. That's a new subject. So we should stop there. John and Mary had so much fun. And then, if we're starting a new sentence, we need to capitalize our T in they. John and Mary had so much fun. They went to the fair and rode rides and ate cotton candy. So now, we have two complete thoughts. First, we're saying they had fun, and then we're saying how they had fun. And we didn't keep it a run-on sentence to where we had this pronoun in the middle of this sentence, making it sound a little confusing. We have John and Mary having fun, and then they went to the fair and rode rides and ate cotton candy. So we split it up into two sentences that are easier to understand. And you also would want to revise any run-on sentences in your writing. If you see a sentence that's going on and on for 3 or 4 lines, you probably need to find somewhere in there to break it up so that it isn't a run-on sentence. You can have sentences that are more complex if you're using semicolons, etc., but you don't want it to be so long that there are too many ideas in one sentence. So when you're writing, make sure you don't have any incomplete thoughts that are missing a noun or verb. We don't want any fragments in your writing, and make sure that none of your sentences are going on so long and including too much information that it makes it a run-on sentence.
An idiom is a group of words that has a figurative meaning, such as you hit the nail on the head. Hit the nail on the head, it doesn't actually mean that someone actually took a hammer and hit a nail into a board and hit it right on the head. It means that they got something very correct, that they were right on track. Oh, right on track is even an idiom. So idioms are commonly used in the English language. In fact, a lot of times you use them without even realizing it, like by the way, as an example of an idiom. Another one would be, she got herself in a pickle. In a pickle is the idiom. It doesn't mean that the person actually got them inside a pickle. It just means that someone got in a tough situation. So every grouping of words that's an idiom has a figurative meaning and a literal meaning. Like this sentence right here, it could actually mean that someone did hit the nail on the head with the hammer. But it also has the figurative meaning, which is where the idiom comes in, and it's suggesting something else. Now, when an idiom takes up the entire sentence, such as honesty is the best policy, that whole sentence is the idiom, we call it a proverb. Whereas up here, the idiom did not take up the whole sentence. In a pickle is only part of the sentence. So when the idiom contains or takes up the whole sentence, we call it a proverb. So important thing to remember is that idioms are a grouping of words that has a figurative meaning. There are certain words and titles that need to be italicized. When typing, these words would be in italics, but when writing it out by hand, these words just need to be underlined because it is too difficult to write words in italics by hand. So here are the words and titles that need to be italicized or underlined. The titles of books, the titles of poems, long poems, the ones that could be a book by themselves, speeches, particularly famous speeches, the titles of movies, the titles of TV shows, plays, long musical pieces, and magazines. Space shuttles, planes, and ships, like the name of a space shuttle, the name of a plane, or the name of a ship, all need to be in italics or underlined if written by hand. Some words need to be in italics if you want to place particular emphasis on that word. Like if someone was saying, come here, they could underline that word or put it in italics. If a word is expressed as a word in a sentence, then it needs to be put in italics. Like if you spell basically wrong, the writer is not using the word basically to express anything in the sentence. They are actually talking about the word basically. So that's why it's underlined. Also, there are many foreign words that are part of the English language almost because they're used so frequently. But any foreign words or phrases that are not very familiar in the English language need to be underlined or placed in italics. Like in this case, edificio needs to be underlined. So those are the important things to remember when it comes to putting words in italics.
Italics and ellipses. Italics sets apart a word or phrase from surrounding words. It distinguishes a word or phrase. It's used for book titles, foreign words, names of vehicles, used for emphasis, and for words of words. And it's used for words only, not for punctuation. So if you have a phrase or a name of something in italics and it's at the end of the sentence, the words get italicized, but the period or exclamation point or question mark at the end of the sentence does not get italicized. So let's look at some examples to see how italics can distinguish a word in a sentence and set it apart from the rest of the sentence so that you really focus on that one word. I loved Black Beauty when I was 11. Black Beauty is the title of a book and it sets it apart, and you know that's what the title is because it's in italics and the rest of the sentence isn't. so you can easily distinguish what the title is from what else I wrote. I just got a feeling of déjà vu, that feeling that something's happening that's already happened before. Déjà vu is a foreign word or foreign phrase, and so it is put in italics to set it apart from the rest of the sentence. The Titanic. The Titanic is the name of a vehicle. This could be cars, it could be ships, it could be planes. Any vehicle, the name of it is going to get italicized. So Titanic gets italicized. He ate not 2, but 10 slices of pizza. 10 being italicized gives emphasis to the word. You notice how when I read it, I emphasized the word 10. He ate not 2, but 10 slices of pizza. You're emphasizing just how great the number of slices of pizza was that he ate. And lastly, italics can be used to set off words of words. I love the word italics. So whenever you're saying, let's look at the word italics, or whenever writing the words through and through, T-H-R-O-U-G-H and T-H-R-E-W, you would want to make sure you were using them correctly in the sentence. Whenever you're talking about a word and you say the word or look at this word, then you want to italicize the word you're talking about. And these would be English words because you're already italicizing foreign words. So it's English words that are words of words. That's what that means. So when you see italics, pay special attention to them and see why those words are being italicized. Is it a book title, a foreign word, the name of a vehicle, or is the author trying to emphasize something specific? Or are they just pointing out a specific word that they like or wanting you to pay attention to a certain word that they're discussing? Next, we're going to talk about ellipses, which are 3 dots, just a little dot, 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 used in formal writing to show that words are missing. And a lot of times this is used to leave out part of a long quote. But if you're doing that when you're writing, if you're leaving out part of a long quote, be sure not to change meaning. If you leave out too much of the quote or you leave out an important part, then the meaning is not preserved. So you want to make sure that you're preserving the meaning of a quote or the meaning of a passage whenever you are inserting an ellipsis. So let's look at this example. This is a quote from Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. I cannot help it. Reason has nothing to do with it. I love her against reason. Well, that's a longer quote, and if you're trying to make it fit in your paper and your paper can only be 500 words, then you could insert an ellipsis. Ellipsis is singular, ellipses is plural. So if we insert an ellipsis, you could just say, I cannot help it. I love her against reason. Saying reason has nothing to do with it is kind of repetitive because you're already saying, I love her against reason. I can't help it. So putting the ellipsis here takes the place of this phrase. It lets you know, or lets the reader know, that there were more words here in this quote, but you took them out because they didn't affect the meaning. So you still get the gist of what the quote was about without having extra words in there. So you cut out 7 words with just 3 little dots. So it can be very handy when using quotes in a paper. So in your writing, pay attention to what words are italicized, see what the author is trying to tell you with those italics, and pay attention to ellipses, what was left out. Make sure that if you are using ellipses in your paper, you do not take away the meaning of the quote.
Misplaced modifiers can be very confusing, and they can distort the accurate meaning of your sentence. So let's look at this example up here on the board. The teacher said that eating fruit is good for you in class. This is a case of a misplaced modifier. Now, another word for an adverb is a modifier. So I'm going to write up here on the board adverb equals modifier. Modifier is the same thing as an adverb. So when we're saying a misplaced modifier, we're actually saying misplaced adverb. Okay, so you're looking at this sentence thinking, where is the adverb? in class collectively is the adverb. This is what you call an adverbial phrase. It's a group of words that collectively takes the form of an adverb, or collectively does the job of an adverb. So adverbs often answer a question. In this case, the question is, where? The teacher said that eating fruit is good for you. Where did the teacher say that? They said, in class. So in class answers the question where. So it's an adverbial phrase. Now, the reason this is misplaced, this is a misplaced adverbial phrase, is because it appears to the reader that this phrase is modifying eating fruit is good for you. So it appears to the reader that the teacher is saying that to eat fruit in class is good. So it looks like the teacher is in favor of the students eating fruit while in the classroom. Now, that's not actually the case. The teacher is merely saying that eating fruit is good for you, but not while you were in class. So the better way to write this sentence would be, the teacher said in class that eating fruit is good for you. So in this case, in class is still the adverb, still the adverbial phrase, but since it's closer to what it's modifying, it makes more sense. So whenever you are writing, make sure that you put the adverb or the adverb clause or the adverbial phrase, whatever word or group of words that's modifying something in a sentence. Make sure that the modifier is very close to what it is modifying. Make sure the modifier is close to the modified. So right here, in class is the modifier, but it's modifying the teacher said, or it's modifying the verb said. But look how far away it is from the verb said. All these words are in between it and the word it's modifying. But when you put the adverb right next to the word that it's modifying, it makes it so much simpler for the reader to understand. Now the sentence can be read correctly and understood correctly. The teacher said in class that eating fruit is good for you. So remember, when you're writing, make sure that you don't misplace the modifier. Nouns can play different roles in different sentences. They can play the role of the subject of a sentence. They can take a possessive form, or they can play the role of an object in a sentence. So I want to look at those three different examples, three example sentences written up here on the board. Take a look at this first sentence. John has wisdom. So what's the subject in this sentence? The subject is John. And the verb is has. So right here, John is the subject of the sentence. Well, John is also a noun because a noun names a person, place, or thing. So John is obviously a person, and this is actually what we would call a proper noun because it names a specific person. So right here, John is a noun, and it's playing the role of a subject. So you can see here how a noun can play the role of a subject. Now look at this next sentence. John's wisdom can be helpful. What's the subject here? You may be tempted to say John's, but the subject is actually wisdom. So if the subject is wisdom, then what role is John's playing? Well, John's is the possessive form of John. It's describing the wisdom. It's saying that the wisdom belongs to John because it's John's wisdom. So here you see John's playing a possessive role in the sentence. Now look at this third sentence. The company hired John. Well, the subject of this sentence is company, and the verb is hired. So what role is John playing in this sentence? If it's not the subject and it's not in possessive form, so what role is it playing? Well, we would call John right here the object of the sentence. The object is what the subject of the sentence is acting on. So the company hired someone. Who did the company hire? The company hired John. The company is acting upon John. So that's how you find the object of a sentence. Now you notice that in this first sentence and in this third sentence, John is in the same form, just John. But when it plays the role of a possessive, then John has apostrophe S to it. So when a noun is playing the role of a subject and when a noun is playing the role of an object, it's going to look the same. But when it's in possessive form, you're going to have to change the word a little bit. Generally, you can just add apostrophe S, but there are some more complex rules when it comes to making some nouns possessive. So the important thing to remember, the thing you need to take away from this session, is that nouns can play three different roles. They can be the subject of a sentence, they can be in possessive form, or they can be the object of a sentence. There's something I like to call preposition overload, and that's when a writer or a speaker uses more prepositions than needed. Take a look at this first example. Where is Jim at? You notice right here that at is a preposition. However, this preposition actually is not needed. You don't believe me? Here, look, we can draw a line through at and try reading the sentence without the preposition. Where is Jim? See, the sentence still makes perfect sense without the preposition. Take a look at this next sentence. Where did Jim go to? We can again draw a line through that preposition right there too. And try reading the sentence without to. Where did Jim go? So a good way of determining whether a preposition in a sentence is needed or not is just by crossing out the preposition or reading the sentence without the preposition and seeing if the preposition still sounds grammatically correct. Take a look at this last example. It's not quite as obvious. He lives outside of the city. That sentence may sound perfectly fine, but actually try saying the sentence without the word of. He lives outside the city. The sentence still makes sense without this preposition. So again, even though this isn't very obvious, this is still a case of preposition overload. And as a writer, you don't want to use words that are not needed, because when you use more words than needed, it hinders the clarity of your writing. Subject-verb agreement is essential to making sure that your writing makes sense. So let's look at some examples up here on the board so that you can better understand how to make your subject and your verb agree. See, the main problem that happens when subjects and verbs don't agree is that there's a certain number in the subject, but the verb doesn't agree with that number in the subject. See what I mean here? The flies are everywhere. See, flies is plural, and are is a plural verb as well. So that's why the subject and verb here are going together. So that's a great example of good subject-verb agreement. Now this sentence is talking about one fly. It says the fly is over here. So since fly is singular, the verb needs to be singular. Is a singular verb, so that's why it's used here. See, if we said the fly are over here, that wouldn't make sense. That's why we say the fly is over here. This next sentence says everything is in place. Words like everything or anyone are words that aren't very specific. So for the cases of subject-verb agreement, we consider words that aren't specific as being singular. So even though everything refers to many things, we still treat it as singular, so we use the singular verb is. This next sentence says people are here. So people is plural. That's talking about more than one person. So the verb needs to be plural as well. That's why we use the verb are. There's some sentences where you're going to have two subjects, and one subject may be plural and one subject may be singular. So the question arises, do I use a singular or plural verb? Well, the answer to that question is choose the verb or choose the word that is closest to the verb. So here we say my grandfather or my parents are going to buy a bike for me. So we would say are, because my parents is closest to are, and parents is plural, so we use the plural verb are. See, my grandfather is also a subject in this sentence. Grandfather and parents are both subjects. But grandfather is singular, so it doesn't necessarily agree with this plural verb. However, we have to choose either a singular verb or a plural verb, so it makes the most sense to base the verb off of the subject closest to it. So this sentence is the same sentence up here, just reversed. My parents or my grandfather is going to buy a bike for me. So here, we use the singular form of this verb, is, because grandfather is closest to the verb, and grandfather is singular. Parents, again, is still plural, but it's farther away from the verb than grandfather is. So the important thing is make sure your subject and verb agree in the number they are referring to, and that'll help you make your writing easier to understand on the reader's part. Subordinating conjunctions are words or group of words that make one part of the sentence dependent on the rest of the sentence. Take a look at what I mean. This sentence says the organization will exist as long as there is ample funding. As long as is the subordinating conjunction in this sentence. Now, the organization will exist could be a sentence by itself. You put a period right there. And there is ample funding could also be a sentence by itself. Those two sentences could stand alone. But when we add to this first sentence, the organization will exist as long as, it makes the rest of the sentence, or it makes that sentence dependent on something else. Because if we were just to say the organization will exist as long as, that leaves us hanging. That's a fragment. It needs some other words to go along with it to make it a complete sentence. So the organization will exist as long as there is ample funding. So as long as is the subordinating conjunction, making the first part of the sentence dependent on something else to complete the sentence. Let's look at one more example. Since it is noon, let's eat lunch. Since right here is the subordinating conjunction. Remember, I said a subordinating conjunction can be one word or a group of words. So up here, it was 3 words. Sometimes the subordinating conjunction is 2 words, and then often it is just 1 word, like since. So here it says, since it is noon, let's eat lunch. Now again, let's eat lunch could be a sentence by itself, and it is noon could be a sentence by itself. But when we add since to it is noon, it makes this part of the sentence dependent on some other words to complete the sentence. Because if we just said, since it is noon, that wouldn't make any sense. That would be a fragment because it's incomplete. So a subordinating conjunction makes the rest of the sentence dependent on something else to complete it. That way, since it is noon, let's eat lunch makes sense. Sometimes choosing the correct pronoun can be difficult. Consider this sentence. Ron and blank left. So here, you either need to insert the pronoun Ron and I left or Ron and me left. So how do you choose the correct one? Well, I'll go ahead and tell you that the correct response is I. The sentence should read, Ron and I left. Now, there is a grammatical way to come to that conclusion, but there's an easy trick to figure it out. Try removing the first noun in the sentence. So if we remove Ron and then we just read the sentence like this, it's much more easy to figure out which pronoun to use. We can read the sentence 2 ways. We can try I left, or we can say me left. Me left obviously is not grammatically correct. So the correct pronoun here must be I left. So then that means we can plug I into the sentence, and the sentence makes sense, like Ron and I left. All right, let's look at another option, or another example. He gave Ron and blank a gift. He gave Ron and blank a gift. So here, do we insert the pronoun I or me? Well, let's try the trick again and remove Ron and from the sentence. So we can try it 2 ways. Once by inserting the pronoun I, and once by inserting the pronoun me. He gave me a gift. Or we could read it as, he gave I a gift. Here, I does not sound grammatically correct. So me must be the correct response, because he gave me a gift sounds grammatically correct. So me is the correct pronoun to insert in the blank. So the sentence now reads, he gave Ron and me a gift. And that is the correct way to do it. So again, the more you get familiar with these pronouns, the easier it will be to determine which pronoun to use. But you can always use the trick of eliminating one of the nouns in the sentence to figure out which pronoun you need. Notice one more thing, that I always put the pronouns second, because in this case, these sentences were referring to the speaker. So say these sentences are referring to myself. Out of respect for the other person, you should always put yourself last in the order of people. So it wouldn't be correct to say, I and Ron left, or he gave me and Ron a gift. It always is grammatically correct to put yourself after the other people in the sentence. Verbals are words that look like verbs but are not playing the role of a verb. Take a look at this example sentence. The smell of the flowers reached my nose. What is the subject of this sentence? Well, our first impulse would be to say that flowers is the subject because it's right next to the verb reached. In fact, I'll underline reached twice because it's a verb. But flowers is not the subject of the sentence because the flowers don't reach my nose. The smell reaches my nose. And this may confuse you because you think smell is a verb. But in this case, smell is actually a noun, and it's playing the role of the subject of the sentence in this case. Now think of another sentence, like I smell cake. In this case, I is the subject and smell is the verb. So the word smell can play different roles. In this sentence, it's playing the role of a verb. But in this sentence, it's a verbal, and it's playing the role of a noun and as the subject of this sentence. Look at another example. Swimming is enjoyable. Here the verb is, and the subject of the sentence is swimming, but swimming could also be the verb of a sentence. But in this case, it's a verbal, so it's playing the role of a subject. Verbals can also be the object of a preposition, like this sentence, I am not pleased about going. So I is the subject, and am and pleased is the verb, about is a preposition, and going is the object of the preposition. So I is the subject, am and pleased are the verbs. So then what is going if going is not a verb? Well, about is a preposition, and every prepositional phrase and every preposition has an object of the preposition. So going is the object of the preposition. Why is it the object of the preposition? Because it further explains the preposition. Now look at this sentence. I hate taking my medicine. I is the subject, and hate is the verb. Now, the temptation here is to think that taking is the verb, or that hate taking collectively is the verb phrase. But hate is the only verb here. Taking can sometimes play the role of a verb, but in this case, it's a verbal, and so it's the object of the verb. That's the role taking's played. That's the role that taking is right there. It's the object of the verb. All right, last example. Listen to the soothing music. Listen's the verb. So soothing is not the verb. So what is soothing doing right here? Well, soothing is describing the music because it's telling you more about the music. It's describing the music. It's telling you that the music is soothing. So what is music? Well, music right here is just a noun. So soothing is describing music, and any word that describes a noun is an adjective. So here, soothing is playing the role of an adjective. So remember, a verbal is just a word that looks like a verb, but is playing a different role in the sentence. Understanding verb tenses is critical because verb tenses are used to show when a verb took place. So if you use the wrong verb, it makes your writing very confusing. So I'm going to look at 4 verb tenses. I have them written up here on the board. First one is the past tense. Then we have the present tense, the future tense, and the past participle tense. So I want to look at 2 verbs and see what they would look like in the different tenses. So first we have the past tense. Think about the verb walk. What would be the past tense of the verb walk? It would be walked. So even if I didn't have all this other stuff about verb tenses written up here on the board, and we just had the verb walked, anyone could look at that and know that that means that that happened in the past. He walked down the street. That verb right there is indicating that he walked in the past. All right, let's look at the present tense of the verb walked. It would be the verb walks. Now, present tense means that whatever is happening is occurring now. Now, it doesn't always mean that it's happening right now. So, like, think about the verb walks. If we say he walks to school, that doesn't necessarily mean that he is walking on the road right now headed to school. It just means that every day, currently, he walks to school. Let's look at the future tense. It will be will walk. That's the future tense of the verb walk. He will walk down the street. Again, you can just look at will walk and know that means something will happen in the future. Past participle is used to show that something happened in the past before something else happened. So it's going to be similar to the past tense, but just a little bit different. We're actually going to add what's called an auxiliary verb or a helping verb, which is the verb has. So we're going to say has walked. So up here we would just say he walked down the street. Now we're saying he has walked down the street. It's showing that that happened in the past before something else happened. Now let's look at one more verb. How about the verb do? So the past would be did, as in he did that. The present tense would be does, as in he does that. The future tense will be will do. He will do that. And the past participle would be has done, as in he has done that. So again, it's critical that you understand verb tenses and that you apply what you know about verb tenses to use the correct verb tense in all of your writing. What is a predicate? Well, a predicate, along with the subject of a sentence, makes a sentence whole. The subject of a sentence tells who is going to do the action of the sentence, and then the predicate tells what that action is going to be. Take a look at this first sentence. The friends hike frequently. The subject of this sentence is friends. So what is the verb of this sentence? Well, since the subject tells us who is going to do the action, and the predicate tells us what that action is going to be, then it only makes sense that the verb here needs to be what the friends will be doing. Well, the friends here will be hiking. So hike is the verb. I'm going to put 2 lines under it to show that it's the verb. So here, friends is the subject. So friends is going to be the people doing the action in this sentence. And then the predicate tells what that action is going to be. This next sentence says, the friends have been hiking. Here again, friends is the subject. So what is the verb here? Well, you look at hiking right here, you know that's a verb. Well, have and been are also verbs as well. Have and been are what we call helping verbs because they're helping hiking right here. So friends says, or the subject here tells that friends is going to be doing the action of this sentence, and the predicate tells what that action is going to be. All right, this third sentence says the friends hike and camp. Friends again is the subject, so friends are going to be the people doing the action in this sentence. Well, what's the predicate here? Well, you know hike is a verb, but camp is also a verb. So here you have 2 verbs because the friends are going to be doing more than one thing. So remember, when looking at a predicate, just remember that a predicate is what completes the sentence. The subject tells who or what is going to be doing the action, and the predicate tells what that action is. A preposition is basically a word that can't stand alone because it wouldn't make sense by itself. Some examples of a preposition would be in, under, or around. You notice these words can't stand by themselves because they don't make sense by themselves. There's not enough information there. So that's where the prepositional phrase comes into play. A prepositional phrase might look like in the tree or around the corner. So right here, in would be a preposition, and tree is what we call the object of the preposition. Because right here, if we just have the preposition in, we're wondering in what? It's in the tree. Or around the corner. Around is a preposition, and corner is the object of the preposition. We don't know what's around. It's around the corner. So prepositional phrases just come in sentences, oftentimes at the end of a sentence. So we could say, the squirrel is in the tree. Here again, in is the preposition, tree is the object of the preposition, and squirrel is the subject of the sentence. So if we just have the preposition, this kind of leaves us hanging. We're wondering the squirrel is in what? So tree is the object of the preposition because it tells where the squirrel or what the squirrel is in. So there's lots of prepositions out there, way too many for me to name right now. But I'm going to teach you a trick to help you remember prepositions. All right, there's a tree I drew. That's about the best I can do. But think about a tree and a squirrel. Okay, think about all the things the squirrel can do when near a tree. And that'll help you remember prepositions. Because a squirrel could be under a tree, and under is a preposition. It could be in a tree, or around a tree, or upon a tree, or behind a tree, beside a tree, next to a tree, beneath a tree, over a tree, toward a tree, past a tree, or by a tree. So all those words I listed, by, past, toward, those are all prepositions. And so by remembering a squirrel and its relationship to a tree, it may seem kind of silly, but that can help you remember many of the prepositions.
In this video, we want to go over prefixes. Prefixes are short little sections of words that come before the root of a word and help you understand what the word means. They add an extra nuance to the word. And why prefixes and suffixes, for that matter, are important, prefixes coming before the root of the word, suffixes, short little endings after the word, is that if you know your basic prefixes and suffixes, they help you determine the meaning of a word. And they're important clues, especially if you're taking a standardized test where they say we want you to find the word with the opposite meaning. Sometimes just knowing the prefix can give you enough of a clue, even if you don't know what the root means, to find the opposite. We've got a few examples on the board and we want to go through those briefly just to show you the importance of prefixes, how they can help you in your test-taking strategies, and how they can help you understand the meanings of words. So prefixes give clues as to a word's meaning. Knowing them can help you find the word with the opposite meaning on a test. So words like prefixes like pre. Here we think pre-operative, pre-op. That means before the operation. Or prescient. Pre meaning before, and scient from the word science, which means knowledge. So to know ahead of time. So prescient is to know ahead of time. Pre-game show, the part that comes before the game. So pre means before. The opposite of pre is post. Post-operative care, the care that happens after the operation. Post-game show, the show that happens after the game. So pre is before, post is after. If you realize this opposites, then if you see a word that's got a pre prefix on it, then you look for a word with a post prefix on it if the test is asking you to find the opposite. Another thing would be pro and d. So pro means for, as in pro-life. Someone who is pro-life is for life. De is the negation, so deconstruction. To deconstruct is the opposite of, or the negation of construction. Construction to build up, deconstruct to destroy. So pro meaning for, de is usually a negation, pre before, post after. Knowing your prefixes can be critical, especially if you're not sure of the whole word. You can say, well, let me break this word up into its prefix, its root, and its suffix, and see if I can't decode just from that minimal information the proper answer on the other side. Now, obviously, when you're taking a test, if you know the right answer, you always go with the right answer. But if you're struggling, if you're not sure, this is a strategy you can use. You can look at the word, break it down, and say, here's the prefix, and I know it means this, and I'm being asked to find the opposite. What's the opposite of this prefix? Then I've got my answer more than likely. Caution though, caution. Con and pro are opposites, but congress is not the opposite of progress, although some people might disagree. That's more of a joke in terms of Congress being the opposite of progress, but con and pro are opposites, but you have to know and be careful sometimes. Anyway, that's been just a basic introduction and overview of the importance of prefixes as a test-taking strategy of knowing what they mean to help you determine the meaning of a word, and also to assist you if you're being asked to look for the opposite. If you know what the prefix means and you know what the opposite of that prefix is, it makes it a snap to find the right answer. If you'd like to learn more about this or related matters, underneath this video you'll see a link. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website that has that information. While you're on that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download.